Hey guys, Courtney here. Just wanted to jump in before I get to the content and let you guys know that I have a special webinar coming up on Saturday, November 5th, and it is about Mars reclaiming the warrior within. So, this one is going to be maybe a workshop webinar style type of thing. So, bring your charts ready. If you have questions, of course, come prepared with those. But we're going to be taking a deep dive into looking at Mars and how it will develop in our childhood, and basically how we can kind of take back where we may have been suppressed in some ways in regards to our autonomy, our will, our anger, our assertiveness, our ambition, our masculinity, our entrepreneurial self, our physical self. Those are all aspects of Mars that can be either underdeveloped or suppressed or really supported in our charts. And if you want to learn about the side of yourself and learn how to bring it into balance, then definitely check this one out. It's very near and dear to my heart, so I hope to see you there. The link for that is down below, and I hope you guys have a great day.
All right, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about Chiron, which is an asteroid in astrology. And there are lots of asteroids and points that I'm not going to go over, but Chiron specifically, I wanted to cover because it has really shown in my readings to carry a lot of meaning for people and a lot of emotional meaning. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about it today. So we're going to cover the mythology of Chiron as well as what it looks like in astrology, and we're going to see some examples in action, including my own personal chart. So Chiron is the wounded healer, and basically that name came from the Greek mythology. So Chiron was actually a Greek god, so he was an immortal, and he was always teaching the art of healing to other people. So I think centaurs were known at this time to be kind of unruly, but he was very dignified. He was really kind and really concerned with other people's well-being and always trying to help others heal. One day he was accidentally shot in the knee by another god, and the god used an arrow that was dipped in blood from this being, and it essentially caused an unhealable wound. So given that Chiron was immortal, he was doomed to suffer for all of eternity. And so he, of course, wanted to die because he was able to heal other people, but not himself. So that's why he was called the wounded healer. Eventually, he was able to become mortal and die, and then he took his place among the stars. So Chiron, like I mentioned, is an asteroid, and it has an irregular orbit, and it spends about 4 years in each zodiac sign. So the house placement of Chiron is going to be very important in order to really understand the area of life in which you're going to feel Chiron come out. I do later on talk about Chiron in each of the signs, so you can get a sense of what that feels like when it's in your chart. As I mentioned, he's known as the wounded healer, and Chiron represents where we hold deep-seated and often inexplicable pain. And the reason I say inexplicable is because we will oftentimes see Chiron pain come up very strongly, but not have a very specific root in our lives. So sometimes, for example, we could have an insecurity around our intelligence or our ability to communicate, but there's not a specific moment in our life where we can go back and say, that's when it all began, and that's why I have this. So the reason for this is because Chiron wounds often stem from past lives. If you don't believe in past lives, then you can say childhood, because normally, in my opinion, our childhood is kind of like a ripple effect or a similar mirror to our past lives. So oftentimes the wounds that we experience in past lives will come up again in a different form in our childhood. And so they're very deep-seated things that we have never fully recovered from and that carry across multiple lifetimes. Chiron is also very prominent in people's charts when indicating mental illness or even physical illness. So if you see this, and I'm going to show you later today, if you see this conjunct a personal planet like Mercury, that can be an indicator that you could struggle with mental illness or with some basically problems with Mercury, which is our planet of thinking and communication. Chiron is also very prominent in healers. It's very spiritual because Chiron is known as the wounded healer. So not only does it represent our own pain, but it represents our ability to heal other people. And I am going to show you again later how this is very prominent in healers' charts.
So let's talk a little bit beyond what people normally say with Chiron, which is, the wounded healer and him experiencing pain and sometimes physical disabilities. Like we've already mentioned, those are the most prominent signs of Chiron in the chart that are extremely obvious. However, there are layers of Chiron that can go into not only past lives, but our childhood, like I mentioned, that I believe have to do with some family karma that we're playing out. So I have actually seen this. I've looked at my family's charts, like my chart, my brother's chart, my dad's chart, my cousin's chart, all within the same family. And we have a very similar, if not same aspect with Chiron and Mars going on. And so what I see with this is that there is some kind of inheritance from the family lineage around a certain issue. And this could be something that felt like it was an unmet or unfulfilled desire or purpose or wish or hope, or it could be something more challenging, like the whole family having a particular type of wound and that being passed on from generation to generation, or the whole family really focusing on developing maybe, let's say, their career lives, but having abuse within the household. And so, or having maybe underdeveloped spirituality. So there is part of themselves that is being developed through the lineage and emphasized in each individual or each family member. And then it's becoming imbalanced. And Chiron can oftentimes come out in family charts where there may be some of these imbalances occurring or underexpressed energy within somebody's lives. And sometimes we even have children that come out to stir things up in the family lineage and break this cycle, and they actually embody those traits. And so those tend to be like the black sheep or the people that feel like they don't really belong because their Chiron kind of albatross is to take on the energy that the family has rejected, to take on the personality and character traits that the family has underdeveloped or disowned within their own psyche. And so Chiron has this kind of unique tie to our past, and it can bring many different members of our family together. Chiron can also be strongly linked with our purpose. So many of us will really want to pursue something externally because of our Chiron function. And so sometimes this can come from a place of wanting to prove ourselves, and it can also sometimes distract us from what Chiron is all about, which is not necessarily achieving a certain goal, but the inner process of who we become along the way. And so I think that that is exactly what Chiron represents. It's tied to our purpose because the internal transformation is the most important part for our soul's evolution. And so Chiron is very important here in representing how our soul is meant to evolve. And it can be kind of challenging as well because there are aspects of Chiron that we might never fully grasp. There are parts of ourselves that we're trying to heal that we might never fully heal. But we also can't give up. We also can't just throw in the towel. It's oftentimes an asteroid that brings about repeat patterns because of its nature of wanting us to evolve from within. And it doesn't just allow us to have a solution to the problem very easily and then just overcome it and move on. It's usually something that remains with us. And I like to think about it, for example, with me and my back. I had surgery as a little kid. I got rods put in my back. And now I function pretty much totally fine, and I don't really have that many issues. But I do always have to live kind of knowing that my back is a little bit different. I have to take that into account. I am changed as a result of that experience. And so that's what Chiron tends to do, is it will change us, even though we can maybe not focus on it and make it worse. It's like once we allow ourselves to release whatever Chiron is trying to teach us and surrender to it, give into it, be okay with it, transcend it. Once we're able to do that, it doesn't completely go away, but it becomes this thing that we're used to that isn't charged, that isn't energized in our lives. So if you can start to study what is going on with your Chiron, you might notice that if you keep kind of antagonizing this area of your life, or if you refuse to surrender to it, or if you refuse to kind of learn from it or do any healing around it, you'll notice that there's just a repeating pattern. Maybe you have Venus Chiron and you keep finding the same types of people that don't honor your worth, that don't see your value and treat you in a certain way. And over time, you have to go within yourself to kind of give yourself what you need, and maybe surrender for your deep desire of finding that person externally that's going to give you that love and self-worth. And you first give it to yourself. And then you'll notice that maybe there's always this feeling of having to work on the side of yourself, work on your confidence, but you'll notice that you won't attract those kinds of partners anymore, because there's something in it that has released its charge, because you have learned and grown and evolved. But maybe it's not always completely gone. Maybe you always do have to kind of put more effort into talking to yourself a certain way, because if you don't, you might slip back into this old pattern. And so it's just like that. I see Chiron as this wound that can maybe never fully go away, but it's ultimately teaching us a huge lesson about ourselves in the process. And it's just like Saturn. It's something that we can overcome, but it's also there with us at the same time. It's like we, in the process of overcoming it or releasing its charge, we're learning a lot, we're becoming a lot wiser, we're evolving a lot, and that remains with us very strongly. I think also Chiron, any planets around it, like conjunct it or maybe in a strong aspect to it, can represent some area of our life where we become hyper focused, or we can have almost like a distorted view of that planet, or that planet starts to become stronger and take over. And I'm going to go over an example of this with Joseph Stalin, who has Neptune on his Chiron. Excuse me. But many of us, regardless, will often also have to maybe make a sacrifice related to Chiron or the planet that's near Chiron. And it's oftentimes a sacrifice that is necessary for you to, again, go through a deeper internal process of learning something about yourself in this area of your life. So anything that Chiron does, any experience you might go through, is ultimately here for some type of deeper soul wisdom and understanding that we learn through difficult experiences. So that's why it has this kind of very Saturnian energy. But Chiron also passes through the orbit of Saturn, but it also is approaching the orbit of Uranus. And so it also has this kind of freeing quality to it, this liberating quality, this part of us that makes it unique to our own essence. So that's why Chiron is also about our purpose, not just because it's about us discovering ourselves and learning, but also because once we do that, we have this really unique, special medicine to give out to the world. And no one else will have that kind of unique experience as us. And so a part of this process is not only learning from the pain, but then kind of owning what makes us special. And oftentimes Chiron is a part of us that makes us feel weird or bad for being different. It can make us feel like we are inadequate wherever Chiron is in our chart. So it's part of our journey to own that part of ourselves more and recognize that being different or feeling inadequate is actually, I mean, obviously feeling inadequate is bad, but being different is actually a strong suit. And you might feel inadequate in some ways, but that's not necessarily the fact. That's not necessarily the truth. Anyway, I think what's also really important about this is that Chiron has 3 different archetypes. So it's the healer, which I've already talked about. Lots of people have this in their chart when they're healers. It's the wounded, so often it's both or all three. And then the last one is the one who wounds, so the people who hurt people. Again, usually with Chiron's full cycle in our charts, which takes about 50 years, we will experience all of these archetypes, or maybe at least two of them. But I'm assuming we'll probably all experience all of them. And I think in any given moment, we can be multiple ones of these. So we can be the one who's hurting, who is hurt, and who has hurt others, and who's healing others. And so I think that's just important to keep in mind, because you'll see, Chiron placement in someone's chart, and you won't know how their consciousness is dealing with that Chiron. Maybe it's coming out that they're this incredible healer, and maybe for someone like Joseph Stalin, they are using that to hurt other people. I often see a lot of celebrities have Venus Chiron. I just wanted to kind of mention this. And it's because there's often this like looking outside of us, as I've already mentioned, for whatever planet is with Chiron. And so I think oftentimes celebrities will be kind of looking for the attention, for the connection, for the love outside of them. And they might not realize that they're doing that. But I've noticed that a lot of celebrity charts have this in particular. During Chiron transits, we may find that we become physically vulnerable, that we become frail, that we become dependent. It has this kind of Neptunian energy where we are maybe depleted in some ways so that we can then surrender to our humanness and to our size and realize like how big the world is outside of us in some ways. And so Chiron transits, again, they kind of break us down sometimes, but it's ultimately, again, so that we discover these different facets of ourselves and that we can live more in line with our soul and not just keep kind of moving and bulldozing through our lives. Let's see. I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, this is the other part I wanted to mention, and then we'll get into the examples. But there is often a part of us that is rejected during childhood, and I talked about this in my 12th house video, so if you have not watched that yet, definitely check that one out. That one's very, very important. But there's often a part of ourselves that's rejected during childhood because our parents are not able to accept certain parts of us. So if we have kind of animalistic reactions to things, our parents might try to civilize us. If we go out and socialize in the world, we're kind of put into constraints. We're told how to behave and how not to behave. And this can, again, kind of compact our personality where we then only accept some parts of ourselves and reject other parts. So I do think that the 12th house has a lot to do with the rejected side of ourselves. And I think Chiron does as well. So you'll notice not only may you feel inadequate where Chiron is, but you might also feel disconnected from that side of yourself because it's not something that maybe has been fully owned and accepted during your childhood. So I think it may be beneficial to kind of look at this area of your chart and ask yourself ways in which you refuse to embody the highest expression of that sign, of that house, and any planets and aspect to Chiron. And in this book that I'm reading about Chiron, the author mentioned soul retrieval as a part of this, where we're kind of bringing back and re-owning all these parts of ourselves, because that whole makes up our entire soul, makes up our entire authentic being. And when we cut off parts to be acceptable for society, there is an inauthenticity to that. And so I think that's why Chiron is also related to Saturn and Uranus in its cycle, because it's trying to, through the hard lessons of life, actually help us try to bring back some of this real authenticity. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into these examples. They're going to be very interesting. Thanks for listening. All right, so let's take a look at our first example with Joseph Stalin, who has Chiron in Taurus, conjunct Neptune in his third house. So first of all, Chiron and Taurus can have a wound around unworthiness. And it's interesting because Taurus has also a lot to do with our sustenance and how we survive. And we'll see in this example that Joseph Stalin utilized food and survival as a way to control people. And also, he just flat out murdered people. So, not a very good guy. He was a dictator in the Soviet Union. And he very much used his Chiron as a way to wound other people. So while it may have been a wound for him as well, he then transformed this to hurt other people. And that is one of the three archetypes that I mentioned: the wound, the wounded, the healer, and the wounder. And we can see from Joseph growing up that he grew up in a quite strict religious household. And we can kind of already get a sense that Chiron with Neptune can create pain around spirituality and beliefs already here as it is. And on top of this, with Saturn on his ascendant, he already kind of had just a strict kind of upbringing that obviously would then affect him for the rest of his life. So Chiron and Neptune here can create this inner need to go within and establish worthiness, establish inner stability, inner value, especially around third house topics, which would be his voice, his thoughts, his perspectives, his intelligence, to establish worthiness and value in that, and especially through his belief systems, through his spiritual means, his spiritual relationship with the universe. That is essentially the journey that he was supposed to do with the Chiron Neptune in his chart, to maybe find a belief system that allowed him to find comfort and stability in his own level of intelligence and own worthiness. However, instead of this, he externalized his Chiron and he utilized his voice to manipulate the beliefs of other people. We can see this with his propaganda that he produced, and we can also see this with his rule. And with Chiron Neptune making an exact trine to Uranus in the 7th house, there is a quality here of using this wounded part of him to not only manipulate, but to also influence the freedom of other people around him. Because Uranus in the 7th, Uranus is a planet of freedom, independence. 7th is a house of others. So this is directly tied. This innate skill of his was tied to then not helping people with their freedom, but the opposite, getting rid of their freedom. And we can see that in these two examples I wrote down here from this website. He essentially designed a famine so that people in the Ukraine had no other option but to be under his rule. They could not be independent. So that's getting rid of freedom by taking away their physical resources, their food, which is a Taurus act. On top of this, he also round up a bunch of the intelligent people. So third house, these are your scholars, these are your teachers. That's what third house topics are. He rounded all of them up for having different beliefs and falsely accused them of being rebellious, of plotting against him. And so as a result, he killed all of them. And we can see that here again with this trine with Uranus. There wasn't this freedom here. He was able to kind of take this and manipulate that against people. Unfortunately, this was also beneficial to him because this aspect, this Chiron Neptune aspect, is making a trine to his Venus, midheaven, and sun in his 10th house. So he had a lot of career revitalization through this manipulation, through this propaganda, through controlling the narrative, controlling other people, eliminating freedom. All of these aspects actually really worked in his favor, unfortunately. And so we can see how this wound around worthiness was very much externalized so that he found his sense of worthiness by essentially taking power, taking other people's rights and freedom away and feeling like he was superior or better than other people. And manipulating with Neptune the truth for himself as well. And so he really kind of fell deeply down the negative side of Chiron, unfortunately, in this lifetime. And he could have had a much better experience with his Neptune if he had gone into his own kind of religious internal practices. So that is example one for Chiron.
Here's an example of another healer, and this is a friend of mine, and Chiron is exactly conjunct her ascendant. They're both at 21 degrees. And just a side note, the South Node represents ourselves in the past lives, and any planets conjunct the South Node also represent who we were in the past life. So she has been a healer for many lifetimes. We can see that. And she's continuing that in this lifetime. She's extremely psychic. She's extremely empathetic and nurturing. And a lot of people are drawn to her work to heal. So whenever you have Chiron in an important place like this, it becomes very prominent. So for her, her energy is just healing. So just being around her, spending time with her, even her appearance and the way that she basically shows herself to the world is very healing. Here's an example of Selena Gomez. So the reason I chose her is because I do know about her past and because I think she has a pretty prominent Chiron in her chart. So if we look, Chiron is actually sandwiched between Venus and Mercury in her very first house, and it's making an opposition to Saturn. And unfortunately for her, this whole mix is also being amplified by the squares to Pluto. Pluto is squaring her Saturn, and it's also squaring her Mercury. So all of these things combined are contributing factors. If you just have, Mercury and Chiron, it's not necessarily going to indicate all of the problems that she's dealing with. However, it is possible to have things like mental illness with Chiron conjunct Mercury, but I think it really becomes clear because there are multiple indicators here saying that that would be how you would interpret it. So basically, the fact that she has Chiron in a wide orb with Mercury is automatically going to indicate that there's going to be some pain and some wounding that is going to be surrounding her thinking and her communication. And it's also almost exactly conjunct her Venus, only 1 degree away. And so a lot of this pain is also going to be coming from relationships. Because it's opposite Saturn, Saturn has this really kind of heavy and negative influence. Saturn being opposite Mercury can make you basically be more prone to negative thinking and to depression because Saturn again weighs us down. It puts restriction. It makes us feel kind of more bleak about life, and that's basically affecting her mindset. Saturn is also loosely opposite Venus, so we know that her relationships again are going to be a big contributing factor to her mental health. And because Saturn is squaring Pluto, this can create kind of obsessive thinking, and it can create more volatility because Pluto can have more of those ups and downs. And again, with this square to Mercury, it's the same thing. So all of these things are basically indicating that she does suffer from mental illness. She has had a lot of anxiety in the past. Obviously, her relationships were a really big source of that because Venus is here in the mix. And she has suffered from depression, from panic attacks. I don't know if I just said that. And she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And on top of that, because Chiron is in her first house, which is the house of physical health, she was also diagnosed with lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. So I would say that Chiron being in the first house conjunct these planets is giving that influence, especially because Pluto is involved in the larger story going on here. So again, we can see that Chiron comes into play with both physical and mental illness, as well as healing abilities and just general wounds that we have in our life. So now let's talk about Chiron in each of the signs. So first of all, we have Chiron in Aries. So this is really a wound around willpower, our assertiveness, our ability to take up space in the world and be confident about who we are. That is what Aries signs typically represent. So whenever there's a wound around the will, we can basically feel like we need to make ourselves smaller, or we can't assert ourselves and ask for what we want in the world. It's almost like we feel like we don't deserve it. There is a lot of that feeling of not being worthy in some respect in all of these, but it's even more prominent with Chiron and Taurus, because Taurus has a lot to do with our self-worth, our vision of ourself, and basically what we think we're skilled at and how we identify ourselves, like the kind of adjectives we would describe ourselves as. And so when you have a wound around worthiness, you can basically feel like you don't deserve things, or you can try to collect physical things in life to kind of prove your worthiness. It's like you're trying to look for a sense of safety and security in life, and there's a wounding around what you are worth, and that relates basically to you trying to find that safety outside of you. And you can also have Chiron in Gemini, so this is a wound around intellectual expression. So if you're trying to speak your mind, if you're trying to say your opinions, if you're trying to describe something and share your wisdom and your knowledge, and you feel blocked, or you feel like you have anxiety around that, or you don't feel confident in doing this, you might have Chiron in Gemini. Chiron in Cancer is a wound of emotional expression. So if you grew up and your family didn't really allow you to express yourself emotionally, if you never knew what kind of response you would get from your parents when you did express yourself, or you weren't heard and understood and met where you were, you can likely develop Chiron in Cancer wound around emotional expression, where you feel like it's not safe to express how you feel. Chiron in Leo is a wound of talent and ability. So this is a wound around being seen and recognized for the skills that you have. You might feel like you're never doing good enough, and like your skills and your work are never going to be up to your standards. So there's this insecurity of people kind of finding out that you're a fraud, or that you're not that great at what you do. Chiron in Virgo, this is a wound around perfection. So Virgos tend to strive to be perfect, to be discriminating and finding out, what they need, what they don't need, and kind of using that energy to cut away what's not working in their life so that only what's perfect is left. And sometimes they can cut right into themselves because they are very critical. And so there's this striving, this constant striving to be something that they're not, or to be the best version of themselves. And it can be very wounding to the self, because it's always like you can't fully measure up. Chiron in Libra has a wound around relating with people. So this can stem from past lives and relationships where you felt like people didn't understand you, or your relationships were filled with turmoil, or your needs were never being met in relationships. There's something here around relating to another human being that has caused you pain in multiple relationships in the past lives, to the point where it's stemmed into this one and is likely felt in your current relationships. If you have Chiron in Scorpio, there is a wound around trust and vulnerability. Scorpio is a sign where we begin to merge with another person on a really deep soul level. But if you have Chiron here, there's likely some wounding that happened when you were trying to merge with someone in a past life. Maybe someone betrayed you. Maybe someone made you feel insecure for when you opened up, when you were vulnerable. And so there can be this wound now in this lifetime where the outside world, or fully being opening up and expressing yourself and your softer side, can feel quite scary. Chiron in Sagittarius, there is a wound around your belief and optimism around life. Sagittarius is where we start to get a higher vision for our lives and what we're capable of. It's where we believe that there are better things out there, that we can strive for more, that the world is a good place and out to help us. And when you have Chiron and Sagittarius, there can be a little bit of cynicism here, where you feel like you can't believe in yourself, you can't believe in life, and you might just have trouble around general optimism and feeling like life is supporting you versus life is trying to hurt you or be bleak in a sense. In Chiron and Capricorn, there's a wound around achievement. So you can feel like you constantly need to prove yourself and your worth through your work. And there is just this sense of striving. It's a little bit different from Virgo, where Virgos are striving to be perfect people, but Capricorns are striving to be perfect at what they do. And so what you can achieve is often linked to worthiness in this sense. And so there is a little bit of wounding around work and your ability to externalize your skills and see results in the world. Chiron and Aquarius, there's a wound around belonging and acceptance. Aquarius, if you have, for example, a moon in Aquarius or a lot of planets there, it can often indicate where you feel like you don't belong, where you feel like you don't fit in, and where you're just different from everyone else. So if you have Chiron in Aquarius, you might have spent multiple lifetimes feeling like you were constantly left out of the crowd and like you didn't integrate well into society or with family or with friends or wherever this Chiron is placed in your chart. And lastly, Chiron and Pisces, there's a wound around trusting the divine and being able to just surrender to it in your life. If you feel like there's an inherent distrust with a higher power, or if you don't even believe in a higher power, then there can be wounding around this where you feel like you kind of need to do everything yourself, where the universe isn't here to support you and you can't just flow with life, but you have to basically make things happen on your own. So the surrendering aspect is going to be extremely important, but also extremely scary and difficult for people with Chiron and Pisces. So I hope that this makes sense for you guys, and you of course want to add in the extra layer of looking at which house it falls in, and you can always go back to that video where I describe the houses so you can get a sense of what it means to have Chiron in that house. And it's so important to really take a look at this in terms of the whole chart as well and see, are there any aspects going on with Chiron? How is it playing into the larger story of your life? I find that this can share a lot about ourselves and some of our deeper wounds from the past. And so uncovering this can be extremely healing. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Have a great day.